I mean, these are the guys that you hire. And they actuarially go through and they say, okay, in Arizona, recessions normally last this long. During that time frame, access caseloads normally grow by this percent. Revenue normally drops by this amount. So we figure that for access, you need a reserve account of this amount, just for that agency. You do another one for K-12. This is your normal population changes that occur. This is your normal revenue drop. This is the amount of reserve you should have for K-12. This is the amount you should have for corrections. And each one gets its own reserve account. And by putting their name, because by having this kind of general pot of savings, nobody owns it. There's an old term called the tragedy of the commons. And it's it goes back to the cattle days. And if you have this common area, everybody would just keep adding cattle. Every rancher would put more cattle on it, and they'd eat up all the grass, and then all the cattle would die. And so what they did by dividing it up and everybody got their own piece, you would never overuse it and therefore cause a failure. And that's the same type of thing. Each agency gets their own reserve that they are responsible for, that they maintain, and the legislature can't take during the good times. And when times go south, they can't steal the whole thing in 1 year. That's what happened this time around. It's what happened last time around. They took the whole rainy day fund to get through the first year of the budget almost. And so they basically used the rainy day fund to continue growing spending rather than bringing it and holding the growth down. To put some real numbers to this, the real problem at the state, the source of all of our budget problems, isn't the economy. Only 1/3 of our budget problem is due to the recession. 2/3 of it is due to what happened the last 2 years. If we had frozen spending at 2007's budget level, we would have no cuts necessary today. No spending increases over the last 2 years, but no cuts either. What happened was in fiscal year 2008, when we were warning the economy was dropping and the recession was coming, they grew operating liabilities by 10.5%. Revenue dropped 9%. 25% swing, you can't do that for very long. This year, the budget they passed originally for this year, 6.6% growth in operations, operating liabilities, with a, right now, so far, about 12.5% drop in revenue. That's the fundamental problem, was you can't, this works for people and governments, you can't spend more than you make. If you do that, you can only do it so long as you have reserve savings account or people will lend you money. We're through our reserves, we're about to find out how much people will lend us money. Yes? Good question. Does this impact the ASRS system? The downturn of the economy does, but the state budget situation does not. In the state of Arizona, our retirement systems are completely separate, independent of everything else. They're not even in a lot of states, the Treasurer's Office manages them, but in Arizona, the various retirement systems have their own boards appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, and then they're completely separate. And they're actually constitutionally walled off from everything else. So the state couldn't go in and raid the pension fund, for example, to borrow money. That wouldn't work, or steal money. And so that's basically, that helps us out. Now, they have seen a drop-off. I mean, anybody that's been in the markets have seen a drop-off, and they were in the markets. And so they've seen their funded balance drop, which means going forward, you're going to see contribution rates increase. There's just no way around that. You're going to see that for a while. One of the mistakes that happened, one of the things that drove this kind of craziness in housing was pension and retirement systems all over the planet trying to make up for their losses after 9/11 and the dot-com bubble, started chasing yield. And they took on a lot more risk than they normally would. We did better in Arizona than some other areas did, but that's really what allowed people to do a lot of crazy lending that was fueled by a lot of retirement systems that were just chasing yield, and they forgot the fundamentals, they forgot the fundamental principles. And those are the types of things, supply and demand always works. It's always at play. We can't forget these types of things. And a lot of people did collectively around the world. Yes?
I see the talking heads on TV talking about the money supply.
Mm-hmm. First off, what does that mean?
Okay.
Very good question. Money supply and how's that work and what's the consequences? Okay, let me bring it back to actually the federal stimulus package and the TARP proposal. Prior to the TARP proposal, the national deficit was less than $1 trillion. After TARP, it was 1.2 trillion. After the stimulus package, you're over 2 trillion. So in less than 6 months, you've doubled the national deficit. Okay? Well, newsflash, federal government doesn't have any money. They don't have that $2 trillion. So they have to do like everybody else. You can raise taxes, you can borrow money, or you can print money. Okay? Well, let's set aside the stimulus. Let's talk just about the new budget that they're looking at. It's about 3.8 trillion. It's roughly $4 trillion. Is what they're looking at for their budget. If they were to actually raise taxes enough to cover that $4 trillion budget, they would have to establish, and so it was actually paid for. There was no deficit. It was actually, they raised enough money to have a balanced budget. They would need to create a new tax bracket for anyone whose household gross income was over $75,000. That tax bracket would be 100%. That gives you an idea of the magnitude, the size of what a $4 trillion budget actually costs. Now, I can guarantee you the collections on that tax bracket would not be that good. You would never actually collect $4 trillion for that. But that just, okay, this puts it in perspective. Now, kind of puts it personal how much money we're really talking about. So how do they get this money? Well, we know they're not going to raise taxes that much. You won't get reelected if you did. So they'll go to one of the other two options, which is primarily borrowing and printing money. First of all, printing money. If your currency for your government is like a stock certificate is to a company. If you have a company with 1,000 shares outstanding and you have one share, you have 1/1000th of that company. If that company prints up 1,000 more shares and issues them, what happens? Well, you're now 1/2000th of the company. Your value of that company is now in half, your ownership or your piece. Well, the dollar is a percentage share of the value, perceived value of the entire country, not the government, the whole country. So any government that prints more money basically devalues their currency, whether it's yen or euros or dollars. Works the same way. Now, we experienced what this is like this summer. Oil went from $70 a barrel to $140 a barrel. Why did that happen? Well, if you looked at the same charts, and we do this at our office, oil went up in euros during the same time period. The increase in oil for Americans was 86% more than it was for other currencies. It's because the value of the dollar dropped comparatively to the other world currencies. See, they were printing more money because we were going into this recession. They were cutting the Fed funds rate. They were printing more money. We were in this recession before the rest of the world. And so our dollar started dropping in value. Well, what happens when your dollar is not worthless, but worth less than it was yesterday? It takes more dollars to buy the same commodity. And so it took more dollars to buy that same barrel of oil. And so what happened is we went through, now all of a sudden the dollar's coming back and it's stronger. We're still printing money. We're still in this recession. We didn't do anything to improve our situation. It's just the rest of the world is now in the same recession we are. So they're all in the same, crapper that we're at, so we're all in the same boat now. What's going to happen is it coming on the other side of this, the countries that start to improve will see their currencies improve better. So let's get back to the stimulus. Let's get back to the budget and how they're going to pay for all of this. You've got a $2 trillion deficit right now. They don't have $2 trillion. So they're going to have to borrow that money. Well, right now, U.S. Treasuries are trading at 0.09% interest, annual interest. That's virtually no interest, almost free. In fact, we've actually had days where we had negative yields. You literally paid the federal government money to loan it money. Now, that sounds crazy, and it really is. The reason why that is because everybody's afraid of what's going on in the market. They don't know where is a safe place to invest. And so everybody is treating